Welcome to Beneath the Bible, where we're helping you dig deeper and uncover the world beneath the sacred book. Today we're going to talk about seals. No, not that kind of seal. Not that kind. Not that one. That kind of seal. But not just any seal or seals in general, but a specific one that's caused a bit of controversy. First off, though, what is a seal? Well, in the context of ancient Near Eastern archaeology, a seal is a small object that was something like a cross between an ID card and a lucky rabbit's foot. They came in various shapes and sizes and typically had artistic motifs, words and phrases, or a combination of both. They had a variety of uses, like indicating ownership of things, concluding legal or commercial transactions, and as amulets to ward off evil. They could be expensive family heirlooms that were passed down from generation to generation, or they were sometimes ad hoc marks on a rock when you needed to seal a tablet really quick. There are a ton of these things that have been found dating from the Stone Age well into the Iron Age, and they're incredibly important artifacts for archaeologists because they give important windows into ancient mythological beliefs, artistic traditions, and legal and economic customs. And while we aren't going to explore the whole tradition of seals and the practice of sealing, we want to focus on one example within this much larger tradition, the so-called Jezebel seal.
This is the seal in question. Before we really dive in, I want to reiterate that we have a video on Jezebel. Who she was, where she's from, the meaning of her name, all that kind of stuff that may be helpful. For now, what is most relevant is that Jezebel is known only from the Bible. She's presented as a princess from Phoenicia who marries the Israelite king Ahab and serves as queen in Israel and likely as queen mother to Joram or Jehoram of Israel. As was common for princesses marrying into foreign courts, she maintained a level of autonomy, keeping her own table, that is her own budget or financial resources, and hired prophets to serve the gods of her youth, namely Tyrian Baal and Asherah. Now, let's talk about this seal. This is a fairly large seal, as far as seals go, about 1¼ inches long. It has various images on it in an alphabetic script which includes the letters Y, Z, B, and L. The seal has some damage at the very top, which may mean some signs are lost. The seal was first discussed in the academic community when it was donated by a private collector to the Israel Museum and studied by the noted epigrapher Naaman Avigat. He published an article on it in 1964 in which he translated the name on it as Jezebel, though he didn't link it specifically to the biblical Jezebel. Now, don't miss what is perhaps the most important issue around this seal. It was donated by a collector. It was not recovered in a controlled archaeological excavation. We don't know where it came from. Now, this is not uncommon for certain kinds of artifacts, particularly for seals. They're very popular with collectors, and who can blame them? They look pretty cool. But this has created a situation where a lot, and I mean a lot, of the seals that academics do have unclear provenance. So, how do you properly study an artifact if you don't know where it came from, or even if it's authentic? Scholars in the field generally fall on a spectrum. On one end are those who think unprovenance artifacts should not even be discussed. They are anathema. They could be fakes. They could be forgeries. They have no context. They don't tell us anything of any real value. We should ignore them, should not talk about them at all, and you're a bad person if you do talk about them, and on and on. On the other end, we have scholars who think we should look at every artifact, regardless of provenance. Real artifacts are unfortunately looted all the time. We should investigate everything, even if we have reservations about some things. Nothing should be off the table. Now, in between these two positions is a spectrum, and how you feel about this seal is largely determined by where you fall on this spectrum. Let's look at some arguments around this seal. We'll focus on two of the biggest voices in this debate, with Mario Korpel arguing for it belonging to the biblical Jezebel, with Christopher Rolston arguing against that. Let me just say, this is a fairly animated debate.
Mario Korpel has a number of publications, both peer-reviewed and popular, arguing that this is the seal of the Queen Jezebel. She has some interesting reasons for that. Korpel may not be particularly well known outside of academic circles, but she has a number of other very good academic articles and books that are published. She's a real academic who does real work, and really good work at that. Now, for her arguments on this seal in particular, she starts by arguing that women in the ancient world, including ancient Israel, could have personal seals, but it was rare, and only women of significant social standing had them. She cites a number of seals from Israel with the phrase daughter of the king, whereas there are many more that say son of the king. So, princesses could have personal seals, but fewer of them did compared to princes. Corpel notes how large this seal is and suggests that this indicates it belonged to a person of great importance. The intricate designs and overall high quality of the seal likewise point to it belonging to someone of great wealth who was able to afford such a valuable item. Now, as for the text on the seal, the biblical spelling of Jezebel includes 5 consonants: Aleph, Yod, Zayin, Beit, and Lamed. Seals also almost always include an extra Lamed, which acts as an attached prefixed preposition and means something like belonging to or for. So, this is what we would expect on a seal that says belonging to Jezebel. And on the seal in question, of the 6 consonants one may expect, only the last 4 are present. Corpel notes that the letters are spread around the seal and aren't in order, so in theory you could fit both an extra Lamed and an Aleph in the part of the seal that's broken. She suggests this would then spell belonging to Jezebel, as one would expect from the biblical spelling of her name. She also cites a number of seals which have this kind of erratic lettering. There's a pragmatic element to this argument of fitting letters in where they can, but also the horror vacui, known particularly in ancient art, where negative space is obsessively filled. Corpel suggests that the letters themselves are more Phoenician than Hebrew. She looks to the extant Lamed and the Yod, for example, and suggests they have Phoenician qualities in the way that they're written. Now, while the lettering on the seal is important, Corpel spends most of her time exploring the iconography on the seal, which she identifies as having royal associations. There are 7 images on this seal which are notable: a sphinx, an ankh, a winged disc, parried uraei, a falcon, and a lotus. Many of these symbols are closely linked with Egyptian royalty as symbols of the pharaoh, but they were also popular motifs in Egyptianizing Phoenician art of the 8th century. This is known from 8th century royal seals in both Phoenicia and Israel. For example, the falcon is the Horus falcon. The god Horus was often depicted as a falcon, and the pharaoh was understood as the embodiment of Horus. So the falcon had close connections with royalty in Egypt. The upright cobras, or uraei, were also understood as protectors, specifically protectors of the pharaoh. Corpel links the double uraei with the headdress of queens, suggesting a pair of cobras will protect their nest. 2 upright cobras were a potent image of protection, particularly for queens and mothers. The Sphinx is also interpreted as a lioness here. The lion has a long history of being linked with gods, numinous beings, and kings, but the lioness could also be linked with queens, particularly the Queen Mother. We have videos on both lion imagery and the Queen Mother, if you want to check those out. The Sphinx also has what appears to be the Isis or Hathor crown, that is, a solar disk in between 2 horns. So we may further link the Sphinx and the seal with feminine royal iconography. Now, all this may seem like a lot of Egyptian iconography, and you may be a bit confused as to why this purported seal of an Israelite queen would have so much Egyptian imagery on it. But it's important to know that by this time, Egyptian royal imagery had spread throughout the Near East, especially to the Levant, and it took on a kind of legitimizing quality. If you wanted to express legitimate kingship, you could use Egyptian motifs. In ancient Israel, Phoenician art had the same kind of effect. What we often see in Israelite artifacts is if you wanted to signal legitimate royalty or connections with royalty, you would use Egyptian or Egyptianized motifs filtered through Phoenicia. The famous Lamelech seals of Hezekiah's day use winged scarabs and winged solar discs, both originally Egyptian motifs. Think of how you know someone is wealthy today. Maybe they have a German car, they drink French wine, they have a Swiss watch. We still indicate wealth with foreign markers of power and prestige. And it was the same in ancient Israel. Foreign symbols linked important people with power and prestige. Mario Corpel is suggesting that the specific symbols used on this seal are not just Egyptian, but Egyptianizing Phoenician symbols, connected with the divine queen. When we pull all this together, it leads us to the Phoenician queen of Israel, Jezebel. Makes sense, right?
Not so fast, my friend. Corpel's argument made waves when she first presented it, with some people gladly accepting her argumentation, but others pushed back, chief among them being the epigrapher Christopher Rolston. Just as Mario Coppola is an excellent scholar, so too is Rolston. He's an epigrapher, meaning his area of expertise is ancient scripts. Rolston raised a number of critiques of Coppola's argument. Before we get to Rolston's argument about the text, let's look at some critiques of the seal besides the epigraphic concerns. Regarding the size of the seal, he says size doesn't matter. He might phrase it differently, but that's the idea. There's no evidence that large seals are particularly associated with royalty or the wealthy. Some seals are just bigger than others. He also points out that we have plenty of seals from individuals who are clearly not royal that use Egyptian and Egyptianizing royal symbols. The presence of these symbols does not necessarily indicate that the user was royal, or even that the symbols were completely understood. I can go to the outlet mall and I can get a jacket that has a Ferrari crest on it. I will never even come close to owning a Ferrari, but I can still wear the symbol because I like it, or to signal elite taste, or any number of reasons. As for the textual evidence, first, Rolston notes that the letters Y, Z, B, and L on the seal don't even necessitate it being the name Jezebel. The root ZBL is part of several West Semitic names, even some that appear in the Bible. The names Zebul and Zebulun in the Bible both have this ZBL root as the underlying basis of the name. There's no reason to read the name as feminine on this seal. This could be a man's seal as far as the linguistics are concerned. But he also notes that on women's seals, as well as within the Bible itself, we should expect a patronymic on the seal. Based on the corpus of other seals and a general understanding of the social organization of the ancient world, we would expect a man's name on a woman's seal instead of or in addition to her name. If this was the biblical Jezebel seal, we would anticipate that it would say either daughter of Itubal or wife of Ahab. It's not a problem that this may be a woman's seal, but women's seals indicate their social standing, which was typically expressed in relationship to a man, either her father or husband. So Corporal suggesting that a lamed may be missing isn't a problem. It may be accurate, but the fact that there's no patronymic would point to this not being a woman's seal. Jezebel may have had her own seal, but if she did, it would be atypical for her to have one that just said belonging to Jezebel. Additionally, Rolston accepts that the broken part of the seal may have had more letters, but by his measurements, there's no need to limit it to 2. 3 could fit, which means we could have a longer name here. He also argues that the letters aren't necessarily Phoenician. He and Corporal both talk about the recumbent bait, but Rolston suggests this is typical of 8th century classical Hebrew. The lamed is angular, found in some early 8th century Hebrew inscriptions, not the rounded form common in other 8th or 9th century inscriptions. The length of the strokes on the Zion is also more 8th century in Rolston's view. He suggests that the text is not Phoenician, but in fact Hebrew and reminiscent of 8th century, not 9th century writing, though conservatively it may be 9th century writing. None of this is in fact part of a much larger issue. Seals with Hebrew names on them appear in large amounts in the 8th century and later. Seals from the 9th century and earlier are almost entirely pictographic. They don't have lettering on them at all. The same is true for Phoenicia. In the 8th century and later, seals have names and titles on them. In fact, the archaeologist Amichai Mazar told Rolston, to the best of Mazar's knowledge, there are no inscribed seals dating to the 9th century found in any reliable archaeological context in Israel. And if I can add an insider opinion here, if anyone would know about that, it would be Mazar. Helene Sadler reports similarly that there are no provenance epigraphic seal or bulle from Beirut, Sidon, Tyre, Barak, or the Department of Antiquities of Lebanon collection. There's a much larger discussion as to why we don't find Israelite artifacts with inscriptions earlier than the 8th century. Scribal activity certainly occurred before the 8th century. Does the literacy rate increase in the 8th century where more people are using written text to conduct business? Is it the medium of writing that changes and necessitates sealing? Is it just a stylistic change? Certainly something changes, and it's not fully clear what exactly it is that leads to an increase in inscriptions in the 8th century. It does seem that the development seems to be linked with socio-political changes in the southern Levant in the 8th century, but it's not really our discussion for the moment. In fact, when I was learning archaeology and I was working on an excavation, we found a seal, and an older scholar told me, if you find it in Israel and there's writing on it, it's 8th century or later. Again, we know there was writing earlier, which would generally point to a good use case for seals and sealing. We have the Samaria ostraca, which likely or at least partially date to the 9th century. We can solidly date Ahab and by extension Jezebel to the 9th century. So if this was her seal, it would be unique in a number of ways, an outlier among the other evidence we have, and outliers are generally not a good thing for archaeologists. So is the Jezebel seal an authentic artifact, and can it reliably be connected to the Israelite queen? That's the question, isn't it? And we aren't going to say. Here's why.
The issues around this artifact are particularly interesting. When it comes to unprovenanced artifacts, the debate usually involves the private dealer or owner who has an archaeologist authenticate the item on one side, and then the rest of the academic community on the other. But this isn't the case with the Jezebel seal. This item was donated over half a century ago and only recently became debated when two very good scholars interpreted it differently. Now, going back to that spectrum that Philip talked about, Mario Korpel is on the side of scholars who think that even if it's unprovenanced, we should discuss it. Don't toss the baby out with the bathwater. This may be Queen Jezebel's seal. And how terrible would it be if we didn't consider that possibility because of the circumstances surrounding the discovery of the artifact? Korpel cites a number of major scholars who side with her on the issue of unprovenanced artifacts. On the other side are scholars like Rolston, who may admit that it's okay to discuss unprovenanced artifacts as long as that fact is clearly stated. Now, what they don't state is that they presume unprovenanced artifacts are fake, at least in part. Oftentimes, artifacts like these may be original, but with elements added later. There is a plausible scenario where this seal, with Egyptianizing symbols, was found, and then in the blank space, the consonants YZBL were added more recently. We aren't suggesting this is the case, and none of the scholars looking at this seal think that this is what happened. But this is something that happens with unprovenanced artifacts, so we need to be aware of that possibility. In the world of antiquities dealing, inscriptions are often added to boost an artifact's value, and all the more so if it can then be linked with a biblical character. So, whether you think this is really Jezebel's seal or not probably depends on where you fall on this spectrum. Are you inclined to trust unprovenanced artifacts or not? The most we'll say is that the consensus seems to be forming around Rolston's view. One scholar has looked extensively at seals with names on them to identify seals which may have belonged to figures mentioned in the Bible. He does not include the Jezebel seal on his list of likely candidates. Two major factors in his rationale are, one, that it would then be a 9th century seal with a name, and two, it is unprovenanced and could be a forgery. Now, while we, Philip in particular, find this argument pretty convincing, you can decide for yourself. You can weigh the evidence, and you can draw your own conclusions. We've left citations in the description below, and you can follow the debate in both the academic and popular literature. And if you do, what you may notice is that this debate got kind of heated. And this brings us to one final point we want to make. Academia often gets personal. Scholars are supposed to go back and forth debating ideas, but sometimes it's hard to separate ideas from the people who came up with them. Critiques of ideas can come across as personal attacks, which beget personal attacks in return. Now, while Mario Korpel and Christopher Rolston largely stayed above the fray, others did not. Critiques on both sides came hard and fast, and things didn't always stay professional. Now, unfortunately, this is altogether too common in this field. But we want to reiterate our commitment to you, to those of you who watch us. We are committed to debating ideas. If we critique a position or an idea, we don't intend for it to be personal. We just want the best ideas to win out while trusting that the people doing this difficult work are doing it honestly and to the best of their ability, unless they explicitly demonstrate otherwise. We hope this kind of trust and civility can prevail in our everyday lives, too. Thanks for joining us for this Beneath the Bible video. If you liked what you saw and you want to see more content like it, be sure to check out our videos on what we know about Jezebel and about the role of the Queen Mother in the ancient world. Be sure to hit the thumbs up button and leave a comment below to help more people find this video, and subscribe so you don't miss what we have coming up next. Until next time, keep digging.